They expected the dying duchess to ask for her priest, perhaps her lawyer, maybe even the distant cousin who stood to inherit if her son produced no heirs. What no one expected was for her to grip the physician's wrist with surprising strength and whisper a single, bewildering request. "Bring me the maid who cleans the East Gallery. The one who speaks to the paintings." The words rippled through Ashford Manor like a stone through still water, reaching the Duke's ears within minutes. He stood in the doorway of his mother's chambers, watching servants exchange nervous glances, and felt something close to fear settle in his chest. Because in all his years, through childhood illness and adolescent rebellion and his father's death, he had never seen his mother ask for anything without reason, and he had certainly never heard her mention a maid he didn't know existed. 3 days earlier, the manor had still pretended normalcy was possible. Duke Lucian Ashford moved through his ancestral home like a man carved from the same stone as its walls, present, imposing, fundamentally unmovable. At 32, he had perfected the art of aristocratic distance, that particular combination of courtesy and coldness that kept the world at arm's length while maintaining every appearance of civility. His mother's illness had been gradual enough that he'd convinced himself it wasn't happening. The Dowager Duchess Eleanor had always possessed an iron constitution that made frailty seem impossible. But autumn had stripped away pretense along with the leaves, and now physicians spoke in hushed tones about weeks, perhaps days, certainly not months. The household responded as grand houses always did, through rigid routine and careful silence. Servants moved more quietly. Meals became more formal. Everything polished to perfection as though order could somehow hold back chaos. Except in the East Gallery. Thea Marlowe had been cleaning the portrait gallery for 6 months without anyone paying her the slightest attention. She was 17, small-framed. With dark hair, she kept severely pinned and a tendency toward invisibility that served her well in a house that preferred servants unseen. She'd been assigned the gallery specifically because no one else wanted it. A long corridor lined with 3 centuries of Ashford ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to follow movement, whose gilt frames collected dust in quantities that suggested the dead required more maintenance than the living. Thea didn't mind. The portraits were company without complication, and she developed the odd habit of speaking to them while she worked. Small things, mostly. Comments about the weather, observations about household gossip. Occasionally her own thoughts spoken aloud simply because silence sometimes felt heavier than words. "Your cravat's crooked," she murmured to the 5th Duke one morning, reaching up to dust his frame. "Though I suppose it's been that way since 1762, so perhaps you prefer it." Does he answer? Thea spun so quickly she nearly dropped her cloth. The Dowager Duchess stood at the gallery entrance, leaning heavily on her cane, but smiling with an expression Thea couldn't quite interpret. "Your Grace." Thea dropped into a curtsy, so deep her knee touched the floor. "Forgive me, I didn't mean, don't apologize for giving my insufferable ancestors more conversation than they likely received while living." The Duchess moved closer, her steps careful but determined. "How long have you worked here?" 6 months, Your Grace. "And you speak to paintings?" Heat flooded Thea's face. "I know it's foolish. It's human." The Duchess studied her with an intensity that made Thea want to disappear into the wainscoting. "What else do you do that no one notices?" The question was so unexpected that Thea answered honestly. I've been repairing the frames. Some were damaged. And I rearranged the sequence in the south corner because 3 portraits were hung in the wrong century." Something flickered across the Duchess's face. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "You know the family history?" "The portraits tell it, Your Grace. If you look at the details. The jewelry, the uniforms, the backgrounds." The Duchess laughed, a sound that dissolved into coughing. Thea stepped forward instinctively, then froze, uncertain whether helping was permitted or presumptuous. "Get me that chair," the Duchess said when she'd recovered. "And tell me what else these dead relatives have revealed." For 20 minutes, while morning lights slanted through tall windows, Thea spoke carefully about brushwork and fashion evolution and the small visual stories embedded in 300 years of commissioned portraits. The Duchess listened with an attention that felt almost predatory, asking occasional questions that suggested she was testing something beyond Thea's knowledge of art history. "You're educated," the Duchess said finally. It wasn't a question. "My father was a vicar, Your Grace. Before he died. And your mother? A seamstress. She taught me to see how things are constructed. The Duchess nodded slowly, as though pieces of a puzzle were settling into place. What do you see when you look at my son? The question landed like a blade between ribs. Fia's throat went dry. Your Grace, I couldn't possibly. You clean his study. You've certainly observed him. Fia had. More than she should have. The Duke moved through his own house like a stranger passing through a foreign city, present but disconnected, fulfilling obligations without inhabiting them. She'd watched him stare at correspondence without reading it, take books from shelves without opening them, stand at windows looking at nothing. He seems. Fia chose words carefully. Lonely, Your Grace. The Duchess's expression softened into something that looked like grief. Yes, he is. She stood then, slower than she'd sat, and Fia scrambled to assist her. At the doorway, the Duchess paused. Remember this conversation, child. When I asked for you again, remember it. 3 days later, she did. And the summons came just as the Duchess had implied it would, with everyone watching and no one understanding why. The Duke stood beside his mother's bed with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression carved into the careful neutrality that had become his permanent mask. The physician had withdrawn. The servants had been dismissed. Only Lucian remained as his mother studied him with eyes still sharp despite the fever brightening her cheeks. You're angry, she said. I'm concerned about your strength being wasted on a maid. His mother's smile was knowing. Say what you mean, Lucian. He exhaled slowly. I don't understand why you've asked for her. Because I'm dying, and I've decided to stop pretending I don't see things clearly. She shifted against her pillows, and he moved instinctively to help before catching himself in the old habit of distance. His mother noticed. She always did. Sit down. You hover like a guard when I need you as a son. The words stung precisely because they were true. He sat. Do you know why your father and I suited each other? His mother asked. The change in subject disoriented him. You were well matched in temperament and standing. We were both desperately lonely people who mistook compatibility for love. She said it without bitterness, just factual observation. We built a marriage on mutual respect and eventually affection, but never passion, never true partnership. And I watched it shape you into someone who believes duty is sufficient replacement for happiness. Duty is what our position requires. Our position requires heirs and competent management. Everything else is choice, Lucian. And you've chosen isolation. He looked away, jaw tight. I've chosen stability. You've chosen fear. Her voice softened. You saw how your father died. Slowly, painfully, with me beside him through every awful moment. And you decided loving anyone that much was too dangerous. The accuracy of it hit like a fist. He'd been 19 when his father's illness began, 21 when it ended. He'd watched his mother transform from the manor's graceful center into someone hollowed by grief, and he'd sworn silently that he would never give anyone that power over him. So you'll die alone instead? His mother asked. You'll build walls so high that no one can reach you, and call it wisdom? I call it protection. For whom? Because you're not protecting yourself, darling. You're punishing yourself for having the misfortune to love your father enough that losing him hurt. A knock interrupted whatever response he might have managed. At his mother's command, the door opened, and Fia entered. She looked terrified. Her hands were clasped at her waist, her eyes lowered, every line of her body apologizing for existing. She curtsied low. You asked for me, Your Grace? His mother's expression transformed into something warm and certain. Come here, child. Closer. Fia approached the bedside with careful steps. The Duke rose instinctively, uncertain whether to stay or leave, but his mother's quick glance pinned him in place. Tell my son, his mother said to Fia, what you told me about the portrait of the third Duke. Confusion flickered across Fia's face, quickly hidden. Your Grace. In the East Gallery. The one with the ermine trim. Understanding dawned. Fia's voice was barely above a whisper. He's painted with his hand on a globe, Your Grace. But if you look closely, his fingers rest on a specific location. A small village in Tuscany where records show he supported an orphanage for 30 years. No one knew why until letters were found after his death revealing he'd fathered a child there before his arranged marriage. And what does that portrait tell you about him? His mother pressed. Fia hesitated, glancing toward the Duke before answering. That he spent his life trying to do right by a mistake. that duty and love aren't always the same thing, and that he was lonely, Your Grace. Despite his position, the silence that followed pressed against the room like a held breath. She sees things, his mother said to Lucian. Not just paintings, people, the stories they don't speak aloud. She turned back to Thea. What do you see when you look at my son? Mother. Lucian's voice came out sharper than intended. But Thea was already speaking, so quietly he had to strain to hear. I see someone who thinks caring is weakness, who believes distance keeps him safe. She lifted her eyes then, meeting his directly for the first time. I see someone who's forgotten that walls strong enough to keep pain out also keep everything else out too. The words landed with devastating accuracy. No one had spoken to him that honestly in years. Perhaps ever. His mother reached for Thea's hand. This child has been repairing the portrait frames no one else noticed were broken. She rearranged an entire century of family history because someone had hung it incorrectly and she couldn't bear the disorder. She speaks to paintings because she understands that everything, even the forgotten, deserves attention. She paused, her breathing labored, and when she spoke again her voice carried the weight of finality. When I'm gone, Lucian, this house will become a mausoleum unless you let someone remind you it's meant to be a home. You don't have to love her, but don't you dare overlook her simply because she isn't wrapped in silk and aristocratic lineage. Your Grace, Thea whispered, horrified. Please, I never meant. I know exactly what you meant and didn't mean. His mother squeezed her hand. Now go, before my son's head explodes from shock. Thea fled. The Duke stared at his mother with a mixture of disbelief and something close to betrayal. What are you doing? Giving you permission, she said simply. To want something beyond duty. To see someone the rest of the world ignores. To choose differently than I did. Her eyes drifted closed. Now leave me. I'm tired. He left. But as he walked through corridors toward his study, he found himself turning instead toward the East Gallery, where lamplight showed a small figure carefully repairing a gilt frame with hands steadier than his own. Thea sensed him before she heard him. She went very still, her fingers frozen on the damaged scrollwork she'd been restoring with glue mixed from rabbit skin and her own stubbornness. You don't have to stop working, the Duke said. She turned slowly. He stood 10 feet away, hands still clasped behind his back, expression unreadable in the lamplight. But he'd come. That itself felt impossible. Your Grace. She set down her brush. I apologize for anything I said that was accurate. He moved closer, studying the frame she'd been repairing. How long has this been broken? The records suggest it cracked during installation in 1789. Someone patched it poorly, and the damage spread. And you decided to fix it. It seemed. She searched for words that wouldn't sound presumptuous. Wrong. To leave it damaged when repair was possible. He looked at her then, really looked, and she felt the full weight of his attention like sunlight through a lens. My mother believes you see things others miss. I notice details, Your Grace. That's not the same as seeing, isn't it? He gestured toward the portraits. You rearranged these. The servants are whispering about it. Heat crept up her neck. The chronology was incorrect. The 8th Duke was hung beside his grandfather instead of his father, and the dates, she stopped. I should have asked permission. You should have been hired as an archivist, not a maid. The words hung between them, too honest for the careful distance they were supposed to maintain. Thea's throat tightened. Your mother spoke out of kindness, Your Grace. Please don't feel obligated to acknowledge that you're wasted dusting frames you could be cataloging. His voice carried an edge she couldn't interpret. To notice that you've been repairing 3 centuries of family negligence in 6 months? To wonder why no one, myself included, thought to ask who you were beyond your duties. Because I'm a maid, Thea said quietly. That's all I'm meant to be. Is it all you want to be? The question struck something deep. One had never seemed relevant. What was for people with choices, with futures that extended beyond survival? She'd been grateful for employment, for meals, and a small room and work that didn't break her body. Wanting more had felt dangerous. But standing in the gallery with 300 years of Ashford history watching, with the Duke looking at her as though her answer mattered, want suddenly felt unavoidable. I want to matter, she whispered. To do work that means something. To be seen as more than invisible. You've never been invisible. His voice was rough. I've been blind. The confession settled between them like something fragile. Thea didn't know how to hold it without breaking it, So she said nothing at all. The Duke moved to the window, staring out at grounds lost to darkness. My mother is dying. You understand that? Yes, Your Grace. And she spent her final days orchestrating. He paused. I don't even know what to call it. Intervention seems too mild. Despite everything, Thea felt her lips twitch. She loves you. She wants you happy. She wants me less alone. He turned back. There's a difference. Is there? The question clearly startled him. He studied her with an expression she was learning to recognize. The look of someone reassessing everything they thought they understood. I'm twice your age, he said finally. You're 15 years older. And age isn't what separates us. No. Birth, wealth, position, expectation, society's every rule about acceptable. Do you care? Thea interrupted, then immediately wished she could recall the words. Forgive me, I shouldn't have. Yes. His answer was immediate. I care. About all of it. I was raised to care. Trained to care. Every decision I've made for 12 years has been measured against duty and propriety and maintaining standards that existed before either of us were born. He crossed the gallery toward her, and Thea's heart hammered against her ribs. But my mother is right, he continued. I've let caring about appearances replace caring about anything real. I've built a life so perfectly arranged that nothing in it actually touches me. And then you. He stopped an arm's length away. You appear in a portrait gallery speaking to paintings about loneliness, and suddenly I can't remember why distance ever seemed like strength. Thea's voice came out barely above a whisper. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't know. I'm saying everything I was taught suggests this is impossible. I'm saying, he stopped, jaw working. I'm saying that when I watched you flee my mother's chambers looking devastated, my first instinct wasn't to maintain distance. It was to follow you. You did follow me. Yes. The admission sounded like surrender. I did. They stood in the lamplight, surrounded by centuries of Ashford ancestors who had made their choices between duty and desire, propriety and passion. Thea thought of the third Duke with his hand on that Tuscan village, choosing guilt over happiness. Of the fifth Duke with his crooked cravat, too rigid to adjust, even painted imperfection. Of all the carefully composed faces lining these walls, none of them smiling. Your mother asked me what I see when I look at you, she said softly. Do you want to know the rest? His throat worked. Yes. I see someone kind enough to let a mate speak honestly without punishment. Someone who noticed his mother's physician needed better equipment and purchased it without announcement. Someone who stands at windows looking lost because he's forgotten what he's looking for. She stepped closer. I see someone worth seeing, Your Grace. If he'd let himself be seen. The Duke closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something in his expression had shifted, some wall lowering just enough to let light through. Lucian, he said. My name is Lucian. It was permission and question and surrender all at once. Thea's hands trembled. Lucian, she repeated, and watched something in him ease at the sound. They didn't touch. Not then. The gallery wasn't private enough, the moment too new, the distance between their worlds still too vast to cross in a single conversation. But they stood together in the lamplight while painted ancestors watched, and for the first time in 12 years, the Duke of Ashford felt the walls around his heart begin to crack. His mother died 3 days later, peacefully, with Lucian holding her hand. Her final words were spoken too quietly for anyone else to hear, but he carried them forward. Choose better than I did. Choose bravely. 6 months later, the East Gallery gained a new portrait, a young duchess with dark hair and steady hands, painted with her fingers resting on a restored gilt frame, her eyes full of recognition. And if society whispered about the Duke who'd married so far beneath his station, none of them noticed that Ashford Manor had finally stopped feeling like a museum and started feeling like a home.